Hello, and welcome to another live chat with Polar Bears International on the explore.org Polar Bear Cam. We're so happy that you could join us again today. I'm Alysa McCall, a staff scientist and the Director of Conservation Outreach at Polar Bears International. And I'm coming to you live from Whitehorse, Yukon. So not in Churchill, but luckily I'm joined by a couple of our other staff members today, who I'll introduce in just a moment. Thank you so much again for watching the Polar Bear Cams this week during Polar Bear Week. It has been an incredible week of amazing polar bear action and other animal action on the tundra. So we're going to talk all about that today. And our theme today was tracking polar bears with technology. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we're studying polar bears using new, cool, cutting edge technology to help us learn more about these bears than ever before. So if you have any questions about that, please do let us know. We do have our wonderful mods, including Cloud, watching for questions and feeding them to me on my computer here. So you can put them in Facebook or you can put them on the explore.org page and we'd be happy to answer them. But you can also ask anything you want to know about polar. We have some great expertise on the panel here today. And we will also talk just a little bit about what's going on across the Arctic and in Churchill itself. So with that, I'd love to pass you over to my colleagues. Let's start with BJ. Can you say hello?
Absolutely. My name is BJ Kirschhoffer, and I'm the Director of Field Operations for Polar Bears International. I'm at my home in Montana right now, and happy to be with you. Part of my job is, making all the cams work here at PBI with the help of Explore. But also I get to work with Geoff, too, on helping researchers study polar bears. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today.
Thanks, BJ. And Geoff is actually in Churchill. Hi, Geoff. Can you tell our viewers a bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Geoff York, and I'm the Senior Director of Conservation at Polar Bears International. And in that role, I oversee all of our conservation work and research and policy efforts. And I'm so lucky to be the only traveler for PBI this year and to be in Churchill here at our new interpretive center.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. And we will talk a little bit more about our interpretive center as well today. You can see behind Geoff, it is pretty darn cool and beautiful. And we're really lucky to have a space like that in Churchill. So again, it is Polar Bear Week. Thank you for being with us all this week. We've had some really incredible initiatives launched. We have the self-care polar bear tips, and we have polar bear bingo that just started. So make sure you have your polar bear bingo card and you're filling it out with your different snapshots and posting what you have. It's been really fun already to see people take it up. There's a lot of great things we can see on the tundra, including this sleepy bear here on the Buggy One cam. So usually we would all be on Buggy One right now at this time of year, roaming around the tundra with our mobile broadcast studio. But of course, because we couldn't travel this year, most of us, we are not on it live, but we still have Kyron McIver, beluga boat driver and this year's Buggy One driver, out on the tundra. So he is out there looking for polar bear action. There's Buggy One there. I think most of you know it pretty well by now. We also have the 4 other polar bear cams across the tundra. We've got the 2 on Cape Churchill Tower, which is kind of way farther out there. And then we have the lodge cams, which are on our makeshift little lodge right now with just a couple cars. I don't know, BJ, do you want to tell the viewers any more about the cams out there? I think a lot of people have a pretty good sense of what's going on with them, but man, they've been getting some good footage lately. Holy smokes. Are they running well?
It's been a super busy year so far, as Geoff will probably talk about here in a minute. The cams themselves have been running pretty well. The Cape Churchill Tower, which Katie just showed a picture of there, that's in the middle of, or whatever, on the end of Wapuss National Park, a place that does not have any roads to it. So I think probably one of the cams are one of the best ways to see the park. It's definitely one of the easiest ways, since all you have to do is open a web browser and jump on the internet. That site is solar and wind powered. So sometimes you'll notice the cams do go down. It's not because things are broken. It's just because we're in an energy conservation mode. And so sometimes the cams just get put on pause to save power. But that's been running well. All in all, most of the other cams have been running pretty good too. And we've just been pumped with all of the polar bear action we've had so far this season.
Isn't that the truth? It's been one of the best seasons I've ever seen for polar bear action, and I can't believe I'm not there. Geoff, could you tell the viewers a little bit about what you've been seeing? Because you are able to get out on Buggy One some days and see it live in person, and it's just been incredible.
Yeah, we've had an amazing season up here so far. I've had a couple of weeks out on Buggy One off and on. We just came in from an overnight on the lodge night before last, and we went from seeing 4 to 5 bears a day, which is great, to last Saturday seeing quite a few more than that. We had a seal kill. This is
Wow.
a photo from that Saturday event, and at the seal kill, we had over 21 bears, including 3 family groups, all taking turns and taking advantage of that, really lucky find or effort by another bear there. It was amazing to see so many different shapes, sizes, genders of bear in so close together and all getting along, pretty well. But since then, it's been off the hook every day for the last 5 days. Bears have moved up as the temperatures have dropped and the ice has started to form, at least on the very shore here along the coast, and the bears are ready to queue up. They've looked great this year. We've seen bears in excellent body condition, and yeah, it's a great year to be up here seeing the bears.
And one thing that we've also been seeing quite a bit of on the cams is the sparring. For those that don't know, could you talk briefly about what sparring is?
So the sparring we're being able to show you from the cams are always males. It's usually 2 males. This picture shows a great example, and they're play fighting. They're practicing. I've seen this year a lot more wrestling going along with that. So not just standing up and kind of boxing each other, but rolling around on the ground and being very social. I think we often think of polar bears as being antisocial animals, and they're not. They can be quite social at times, groups of males like you're seeing here, and then clearly family groups as well. Conventional wisdom amongst researchers and managers is that they're practicing this time of year. There's not much going on, there's nothing to compete for, and so it gives the chance for males to suss each other out, to practice their moves, and also just to get up and moving again. It's getting colder. They've been mostly lying around for the past several months, and now it's time to loosen up, hone their skills, and get back out on the ice.
Do we know if they are social like this when they're out on the ice, or is this something that we mostly see when they're kind of stuck on land right now?
It's one of those questions we haven't fully answered yet because we don't see them when they're out on the ice most of the time. Most of our observations and interactions with bears are coastal, especially in places like Churchill and on Wrangel Island in Russia, where bears congregate. We definitely see it in the fall. It's not just a Churchill thing. We don't know if they do it in the winter. What we do know is during breeding season in the spring, it's no longer play. It's real fighting, and males are quite good at hurting each other, all in competition over a female. And so that's when it gets serious, and that's why too males don't live as long as females. They're pretty good at roughing each other up and live a more rough and tumble lifestyle, higher risk, and so they don't live quite as long as females in the wild.
And as we're talking about the rough and tumble lifestyle, we see that sleeping bear in the willows there. He's, well, or she is deciding right now, I think, to conserve some energy and have a little nap on the Buggy One cam right there, letting the snow kind of drift over. That's a nice bear to have on Buggy One cam at the moment. So we have a question, and Geoff, I'm going to send this one back to you again. And this is something I also have seen on the cams in the last week, which has been very interesting. So it's about the mother polar bears that are out there with their cubs right now. So people have seen these moms kind of charge at the male bears that are getting too close to the cubs, but they haven't seen the mothers going after each other or charging at the other mother bears. Do the mothers protect each other's cubs, or do moms kind of feel differently about other families versus other males out there maybe?
Sure. So, I mean, it's a great question, and it's, I would say, somewhat unknown, but we don't see females being visibly social with one another. We also don't see them being visibly aggressive or concerned about other family groups. They seem comfortable around one another, but they don't sort of share, work or share looking after cubs, things you think they might do in nature there. So I think quite different there. And it's been fascinating to watch. Last Saturday when we were at that seal kill, there was a mom with two large yearlings, and one of the larger yearlings, which appeared to be a male, would charge ahead of the mom towards an adult male to push it back. I mean, mom was right behind it, so it knew it had serious backup. But this group in particular has been very vocal, a lot of vocalization that day, and we've heard them a few times since. So quite quite unique to hear and see some of that stuff. Really, really cool.
Yeah, that sounds incredible to be able to even hear that up close, because we don't always get to hear polar bear vocalizations. They don't happen all the time. That's really great. And so in the background here, we have Katie Miller mixing this broadcast together so that you're getting to see us as well as the polar bear cam and all these images. And she just reminded me she's got this great footage that I'd love to show you people. So when we talk about what it's like for polar bears when we aren't watching them on the cam, we don't really know what's going on with polar bears until we can use some sort of technology or other innovative solution. So what we have here is a video collar cam put out, I believe, in Alaska. Geoff, are you able to tell us just a little bit about what's going on in this video?
Sure. So this was just a cool collaboration with a videographer and an engineer to develop these collar cams. And this is in Alaska, out on the southern Beaufort Sea. And it's a bear just interacting. These are all on adult females. And so it's probably hanging out with an adult male. This is springtime when males and female polar bears do get together. And then you see it here just cruising out. That's what it looks like out in the Beaufort Sea in April, May. This looks more like May with some of the meltwater there, but just so cool to see it from their point of view, them out in their habitat.
Wow. Yeah, I wonder what that male thought about that color. Clearly not too bothered. The colors blend in very well with the bears. And she's obviously having a great time walking around with it, not bugging her very much. Very cool footage. Thanks for reminding me we had that, Katie. I like that. And this is a wonderful segue into more of our talk about technology. Polar bears live in one of the harshest environments in the world. So remote, so cold. It can be wet, it's dark. The Arctic is a brutal place at the best of times, but when you're trying to get little gadgets to work or trying to ask questions about the animals that live out on the sea ice, it's really, really difficult. So we need some innovative minds and solutions to help out with that. And luckily at Polar Bears International, we have BJ and Geoff and the rest of our wonderful team to help us come up with these solutions and different ways to study polar bears. So we wanted to talk about a few different things that Polar Bears International is involved with right now, either leading or supporting. And then again, take any questions you guys have about studying polar bears or just polar bears themselves and what you're seeing on the cams. So one of the first things we wanted to talk about was that kind of collar technology. That was one of the first ways that we started tracking polar bears. We've been collaring polar bears for quite a few years now. One of the best studied polar bears in this respect with collars is the Western Hudson Bay subpopulation, which are these Churchill polar bears that you're seeing. There we go. There's a great video there. So we do collar females only. Males have, you can kind of think of them as pylon heads. They've got these really thick necks and more of a cone-shaped head. And so the collars can slide right off of their necks. But when we collar females, the collars will stay on longer. They can still pull them off if they really want to, but they tend to stay on better. So we can program them to fall off in between 1 and 2 years. So as soon as the collar is done, it's got a little clasp on it that will just break away, and then we can go pick up the collar later and the bear is free to go. But the type of data that these collars give us is absolutely crucial and valuable. It has taught us so much about what polar bears need, when they move, what type of sea ice they move on, and can give us a lot of clues about even what they're eating out on the sea ice. So we really appreciate what the collars have done for us, but it's also important that we keep looking at better forms of technology and ways to, make the technology even smaller and lighter and have the polar bear even notice it less than they already do. And so in the last few years, there's been a couple new technologies that have come out. And, as things get better, technology gets smaller. We can look at cell phones as one example. Computers is a very good example of that. And so the GPS technology that we are using has been able to get smaller and smaller. And one of the things that we are using right now is a GPS ear tag. And I don't know, BJ, do you want to talk a little bit about this GPS ear tag, and or Geoff too? And I think Geoff might even have a model of it in the interpretive center there. We can show you guys a bit more, bring up a picture. But they've been going out first in the Western Hudson Bay subpopulation and have taught us a lot more about different bears.
Sure, I can show
KT
you.
maybe
Go ahead, Lee.
is having a little trouble there. Oh, it's coming back to her. Yeah, I think
there we go.
both Geoff and I have an
Oh,
ear tag
perfect.
transmitter. This is what they look like, and I think Alysa, you described it well. Things in technology that continue to get smaller. Our cell phones are a good example of that. If you maybe watch a movie from the late 90s and you look at a cell phone, it's almost unrecognizable to what we have today. And you know, it's nice to see that transmitters are also getting smaller. This is what one of those collars looks like. Now this ear tag doesn't do everything that this big collar does, but it does give us location information. And it's interesting that we can maybe attach this to bears, other bears than just females, which is the only bear that we put these big collars on. So that's why these are pretty interesting. The question to us, at least recently, was, you know, this thing continues to get smaller, but how do we attach it to a polar bear? What's the best way to stick this to an animal? Because of course the collar is easy, right? You just, you know, put it on over the bear's neck. But what do you do with this tiny little thing? How do you get it to stick to a bear? And so Geoff and I approached some friends of ours, actually my father there at 3M, and we said, how would you stick this to a polar bear? Of course, these are the people that make all kinds of tape and glue, Post-it notes, just all kinds of amazing products. And we offered it to their engineers, and they came back with a variety of different solutions to act as almost like a little sled or a carrier for this very transmitter. So that's where we're at right now with the project. We're really excited. We're hoping that we're going to be able to attach to some polar bears here in the near future. Yeah, so that's where we're at with the ear tags.
Very cool. I was hoping, Geoff, could you just speak really briefly about the testing process for these? Because we don't go straight to the wild polar bears in this case. And this is a really great opportunity about how our partners in the zoo world can really help inform the conservation of wild polar bears.
Sure. So what we're hoping to do now with, you know, these smaller tags is to get them out on living bears. And we'll probably take a dual approach where, depending on opportunities, we might be able to get them out on some polar bears, maybe yet this fall in a wild setting to see how they do. And then we're also working with our partners in the captive world, and we can get different information from both of those scenarios. So with wild bears, we can definitely get some good movements data, and we can see how long the tags stay on the bears, but we won't know what happened most of the time. The tags are designed now with a fur attachment to fall off when polar bears molt in the midsummer. So we won't be around them. We won't be able, most likely, to collect them or to see what happened. So with our captive partners, it gives us a great chance to see, okay, if we try to attach a tag on a bear, you know, say back here, mid shoulder blade, lower neck, what does it do? Does it ignore it? Does it find the nearest rock and go and start, you know, rubbing on it? How does it perform in real time? And if it does come off, what led up to that coming off? Was it just normal wear and tear? Did another bear come over and pull it off? Sort of what happened. And so we'll get a lot more detailed information from putting these tags out in a captive setting where they can be watched more frequently than we will with the wild. But both are important parts of testing them out and seeing if they'll work. And like Alysa said early on too, just given the conditions that polar bears live in, and given that they're bears, they're tough on things. If we can show this works with polar bears, it'll be super useful for other bear species and other wildlife.
really fantastic technology. And one of the coolest things about this, just to reiterate, is that, again, the collars really can only go on female polar bears, but these sorts of adhesive tags can be put on male polar bears and even younger polar bears without bothering them very much at all. So it's very great that we can collect data from other bears in the population. Gives us a better picture of how the entire population is doing. And when we know more about what these different bears need, we can better protect them. And the Western Hudson Bay subpopulation is such an incredible group of bears because they are accessible on land at certain times of the year, and because we are able to connect their body condition changes with changes in the sea ice. We know a lot about what they're going through, about where they've been. We've been studying them since the 1980s. So to test these sorts of technologies on these bears in responsible ways is really a fantastic opportunity. And these bears here have taught us so much about the species across the Arctic. And what we're learning here can be applied to conservation practices around the world, which is pretty special. So I'd like to kind of maybe zoom out from Churchill for a moment, though, after talking about how great it is. And you guys have been involved with a project I thought we could just touch on because I think it's relevant right now and it's so interesting. It's the SAR research and looking at dens, for example. Would you be able to speak a little bit about your SAR work? Like, what is SAR? Why is it important? And how has it helped us learn more about polar bears?
Sure. So
Maybe we'll take a
SAR
step back
stands
even
for.
more.
Oh, go ahead, Geoff. Sorry, there's a bit of delay there.
Oh, no problem. Maybe we'll take a step back even more and talk about why we even need something like SAR.
Yes.
So years ago, our chief scientist and I worked with partners and developed a tool called FLIR, forward-looking infrared, and figuring out how that tool was useful in finding polar bears in their snow dens, because they do give off heat over the course of the winter. That heat kind of percolates up through the snow, and under the right conditions, you can see that heat. This is a great image of what that can look like. The trouble with FLIR is it only works well if conditions are almost perfect. So you need cold, calm weather, no wind, no sunlight, all together. And all of those conditions don't happen that often. Things like snowfall, things like blowing snow and wind, and definitely direct sunlight kind of make it impossible to see that light heat signature. So we've realized in application, while FLIR can be good, it definitely has its uses, it's not the perfect tool to really go out on a bigger landscape and look for polar bear dens in the snow. And so that's where SAR came from. And BJ, go ahead and jump in on SAR.
Yeah, I think one of the big motivations, we were using FLIR, just as Steve and Geoff and others had said we should. And we were using a handheld model when we were doing some den research in northern Alaska. We were trying to find, really localize exactly where these dens were. And we found that it was a pretty tough tool to use, to have those conditions that Geoff mentions, where there's no wind, the sun's below the horizon, no fresh snow. It doesn't happen very often in the Arctic. And if you try to use the FLIR outside of those parameters, you don't see much. So we got pretty frustrated and said, we need a new tool. We need to figure out something else. And so we became aware of synthetic aperture radar. That's what SAR is. And it's not synthetic in maybe some sort of plastic. It's actually synthesizing a larger antenna by using movement of the device itself. So that's just kind of how it works. You have to have the device moving. So it could be moving on a truck, could be moving on an airplane, helicopter, something like that. But using that movement, we can then synthesize this really, really big antenna and look over a large area for things that might not be able to be seen with the naked eye. And that's the other aspect that we really like about the prospects of this SAR, is that not only could you mount it to some sort of vehicle, but it also can see through lots of different things. It can see through bad weather, it can potentially see through snow. And so these are all things that are very interesting to us when we're working in the Arctic, when you're trying to find an animal that's trying to stay hidden. We want to be able to see through all these things. So that's synthetic aperture radar. The idea, at least to start out with, is can we find dens underneath the snow? Can we find these mothers with one or more cubs, so that we know where they are, so we can maybe protect them and maybe also study them.
Very cool use of technology. Thank you guys for that. Yeah, and these mothers and cubs in their dens are so critical, of course, to the population. And I think we can all agree that it's important to protect denning mothers. And you guys have also been working on the maternal den cam project in Norway. BJ, could you start off, and then Geoff can fill in anything? Tell our viewers a little bit about this Norway project in Svalbard, looking at moms and cubs.
Yeah, so like we mentioned there, Geoff, of course, has spent a lot of time in Alaska with Steve. I got to work there for a few years looking at dens. It became hard for a lot of reasons to find dens in Alaska. So we started collaborating with Norwegian colleagues, the Norwegian Polar Institute, as well as the San Diego Zoo, and we built up a similar project over there where we wanted to look at polar bear maternal dens. And we do this with cameras because, spending time in front of a polar bear den probably could cause the female some stress, but also it's quite uncomfortable for the people. It's cold where polar bears live. We all know that, but it's also super remote. So we were using a variety of cameras. The one that we are sort of settling on now is a home built model. I'm going to hold it up here. This is the guts of what we're working with. This is a Raspberry Pi computer. If you're into this sort of thing, it's a single board computer. That's it right there. That's enough of a computer where you could type your homework on it. And then a camera that we attach to this thing. We're working with the San Diego Zoo to actually build our own program to work exactly the way we want, to have the camera turn on as soon as it sees power and record all the time that it's out there. So we're building these cameras from scratch, putting them, here's a nice little clip, putting them in these plastic boxes to keep them out of the weather, and hitting the record button and then leaving and letting them do the work of documenting what happens at the den site. How many cubs come out with mom? How long do they spend it? Then how big are they compared to each other? And as well as, what do they do? These females that we're studying have accelerometers built into the collars that they're wearing. And we can start kind of, validating the behaviors that we see on those accelerometers versus what's on the camera. So this is a beautiful shot here. You can see that the females in Norway sure know how to pick a beautiful place to den.
No kidding. And talk about technology shrinking. Those original den cams, I mean, that project started, I believe, in Alaska, and they used to be in like these huge coolers. I've seen some of these old pictures that were, I mean, there's some big technology. And for you to be able to show us that Raspberry Pi computer, that's pretty cool how things have changed in your career already. Holy.
Yeah, I think I got tired of hauling, 180 pounds of batteries around. So that's the true motivation here, to shrink things down. No, but it's good to keep pushing this stuff forward as things become available.
Totally. Yeah, and I think it's especially critical to be monitoring these moms and cubs in Norway because the sea ice has changed so much in that region, and it's really getting harder for them in some of those areas to get out on that ice with their cubs. And with that, I was hoping, Geoff, could we pop over to you for kind of a sea ice update in the Arctic? Folks on the polar bear cams in Churchill are starting to see the snow, a bit of ice come in, but other areas of the Arctic aren't looking so hot. It's another one of these weird years. Could you give our viewers just a brief overview of what's going on with the Arctic sea ice right now?
Sure. So Arctic-wide, we had another really bad year for summer sea ice. We had a lot of loss again. It wasn't the record year, it was almost, but that's still not good news. And if you looked at a map of Arctic sea ice extent right now, we are at historic lows. So while the September minimum didn't quite get there, we saw a delay in freeze up, mostly in the Siberian Arctic, so from Alaska over to Norway, where we still have, as of yesterday, 2 days ago now on this, you're seeing huge areas of open water in the Chukchi Sea and the East Siberian Sea and the Barents Sea. And then if you look down to where I am in Hudson Bay, you're starting to see some shorefast ice, that goes out maybe a kilometer. The bay itself itself, even up into Fox Basin, is largely ice-free here in November. So still a lot of open water very late in the year, and still seeing historic lows right now across the Arctic.
I think that's such an important point to remind folks of whenever we can, is that again, we focus largely on the Western Hudson Bay polar bear subpopulation during our education and outreach, just by nature of having the polar bear cams in Churchill and our PBI house in Churchill, which I'd love to talk about in a moment. But we should remember that they are just one of 19 different polar bear subpopulations across the Arctic. And we talk about 4 different sea ice ecoregions, the divergent, convergent, archipelago, and seasonal sea ice ecoregions. You don't need to remember all those, but we have all that information on PBI's website. But that's just to say that polar bears around the Arctic do have different sea ice situations, and they're being impacted at different rates by sea ice loss. So in Hudson Bay, of course, these are some of they are the most southern polar bears in the world. And so we are seeing rapid changes, even though, again, we are seeing sea ice for these Western Hudson Bay polar bears right now, which is exciting for them. They are in a neat little pocket at the moment. But across the Arctic, we can look at these different polar bear subpopulations experiencing sea ice in different ways at different times of the year. And so really having a full comprehensive look at, what they need and when and what's happening is important for the long-term conservation of these species. And that's something that we try to reiterate at PBI House in Churchill. Hopefully one day you all can visit, but for now, Geoff is there. Maybe he can tell you a bit about it. One of the points of PBI House is to welcome visitors to Churchill, to tell them more about polar bears and research, but also to help build context around these Western Hudson Bay polar bears in and among the entire Arctic population of polar bears. And Geoff, I was just hoping you could maybe show the viewers a little bit about the house. I mean, it's so beautiful and amazing and new, and kind of empty right now, but maybe a good opportunity for you to talk a bit about it.
Yeah, like Alysa said, this has just been a tremendous benefit to us here. There are so many visitors that come to Churchill, and increasingly year round, not just for polar bears, but to come in the summer, see beluga whales, to come and see wildlife more broadly. A lot of migratory birds come through this part of the subarctic, and then to come in the winter for northern lights. And apparently, too, some people like to come just for winter. So we're seeing a lot more travel here. Of course, not this year. And we wanted to build this place, the inside of which is a really nice interpretive center. It's a calm, quiet place, so we can do deep dives with visitors, have conversations that may be tough to have out on the buggies because people are understandably looking out the window, looking at bears, and trying to make the most of those situations they're in. But here at the PBI house, we have their undivided attention. We can give them the best available scientific information. We can answer questions that they developed while being up here, and hopefully send them home more informed and ready to take action for polar bears. So it's been a huge benefit to us. And the house itself, while interpretive space on the first floor, also serves as a base for us. We have rooms here that we can store our technical gear in that allows me to be talking to you right now. We have space upstairs for our scientific guests and others to spend the night and be pretty comfortable, kind of separate from this space. So really expands our capabilities here. We're super lucky to have it.
We are. It's an incredible space. And again, even though there are 19 different subpopulations across the Arctic, Churchill really is special. It's called the polar bear capital of the world for a reason. And again, it's one of the best places to do polar bear research because of the accessibility of polar bears in the area. And there's another research project happening right there that I was going to throw over to BJ to talk a bit more about. BJ, could you tell the viewers a little bit about the polar bear radar project happening on the tundra right now?
Ooh, I was worried they were going to spring a question I didn't know on me here. No, this is great. We're working. Of course, Churchill is a place where a lot of bears are in and around seasonally. And Churchill has this really unique program called the Polar Bear Alert Program. And you can think of it almost like polar bear police officers, if you will. They protect the community. If someone in the community or one of these officers sees a polar bear, they're trained to deal with it, either haze it out of town or potentially capture it and bring it to a safe place until it can be transported further away from town. Not every community in the north is as lucky to have a program like Polar Bear Alert. So what can we do about it? The question was kind of posed to us, and uh, this polar bear radar that we're working on it's a Doppler tracking radar. It's a radar that sees movement and can send all types of alerts, or perhaps turn on different switches, things like that. So this is a view of it right here. The radars are themselves, the units are about the size of an iPad, so they're quite small, and you mount them pointing towards the direction of the area that you want to observe or watch. And if something moves in that area, you'll see it gets this little orange dot placed on a Google map that inside of an interface that you can log into. And based upon different parameters, you could have that little dot then trigger maybe alarms. You could have it send emails. You could maybe make it blink lights, things like that to alert community members, maybe alert folks that would be responsible for hazing the bear, like Polar Bear Alert, all kinds of different things. Really, it's hopefully going to become a useful early warning system for people living in the north to let them know that there are polar bears in the area and that they should take action to move them along.
Absolutely. And what a critical piece of technology and a help for this situation where polar bears are spending more time on land. Geoff, I was wondering if you could tell the viewers a little bit about your work in the human polar bear conflict world. Geoff is pretty high up in some of these committees and has done some really important work on polar bear safety. One of the big things that Polar Bears International is concerned about in the coming years is this rising human polar bear conflict, especially, in Hudson Bay. As the sea ice is freezing later and breaking up earlier, we are seeing bears spending longer times on land. And of course, people live on this land. There's communities all up and down the coast, communities that eat food and have garbage and have children running outside and have all these, attractants and things they need to protect. And so that's one thing that's on top of our mind. And Geoff, could you just speak a little bit about your work kind of in that world and how this radar might help be applied across the north?
Sure. So like Alysa said, as we continue to see summers like the one we just had with sea ice drawing back dramatically around the Arctic, we're seeing more and more polar bears spend more time on shore and for longer periods of time. So it's become a growing concern for managers. How are we going to deal with this? The issue they're concerned about, if more bears are on shore and we have this new open ocean, we're also getting more people up in the Arctic. People who live in the Arctic can travel further than they could before with these open seaways. Visitors on cruise ships and smaller boats can come up into the Arctic where they couldn't before. And industry can push further into the Arctic to take advantage of that access as well. So we have kind of a perfect storm of people and bears intermixing. Because of all that, the polar bear range states, so all of the countries who have polar bears, as part of their coordination and work together, set up the conflict working group. And PBI has been an active member of that through me. And what we're trying to do is get ahead of the curve. We see this issue coming. We hear the concerns from frontline managers, and we're trying to make sure they have the tools and the resources, and also that we're sending a coordinated safety message to the public, to northern communities, with northern communities, so that they can successfully live, work, and recreate where polar bears are safely. So it's a multi-pronged approach. It definitely touches on things like the Compact Surveillance Radar project. That's a higher tech solution, but it runs the gamut from other work we're doing, like looking at bear spray. Does bear spray work on polar bears? Does it work in the north? Does it work in the cold? Answering some of these questions to help make sure, again, that people have the tools they need and a variety of tools to stay safe.
And Geoff, could you answer those questions for our viewers about bear spray? I know there was some brand new research just published about the efficacy of bear spray in the Arctic, and some folks might not have seen that. Does bear spray work in the Arctic in the cold, in the north?
It does. So a project we
Mhm.
started under the auspices of that conflict working group took on those questions, and we have a paper that just came out that looked at the technical side of that question. And doing lab-based surveys with partners at Brigham Young University, we know that, yeah, it does work in the cold. It doesn't work as well, but even down to minus 23 C, we're getting about a 2 meter spray pattern from those bottles. Does it work in the wind? Yeah, it actually does
Mhm.
work in winds up to 10 meters per second, which is pretty strong wind there, and it'll go out up to 4 meters in those strong winds. And so the things we learn from doing the lab testing apply to bear spray broadly, not just with polar bears. But it's keep the can warm if you can. Keep it, tuck it in an inside parka there. Don't test fire it because each time you pull the trigger on your can, it lets out a fair bit of head pressure. And yeah, everything we learned about it supports that it's something you should carry anywhere you might run into bears, whether they be brown, black, or white.
Yeah, at PBI, we always have our bear spray on us whenever we're working or walking around anywhere that there might be polar bears. So we advocate for bear spray. It does work. Handle it responsibly, and you might as well have it on you for sure. So we have some more questions coming in that I would love to hit on, and I'm just looking at them here. So we've got a great question about kind of further technology. So we've had a couple opportunities to mention how these technologies have gotten smaller, but with that trend continuing, is it possible to create a microchip that would do what the tracking device does? Can you foresee a microchip at the track bears ever being used in the Arctic, Geoff?
It's a great question and one we've also thought about. We have looked at things like RFID to be a shorter range way to identify individual bears. The problem with microchips, we use them on our pets. Dogs and cats are pretty often microchipped these days for identification, is its skin contact. So the reader needs to be up against the animal in order to read it. And that doesn't really help us with the dangerous predator because it's tough and wouldn't be very safe to get that close. Our colleagues in Norway at the Norwegian Polar Institute are shifting over to little chip tags that they put in the ear just subcutaneously, hoping to get away from the white ear tags that we have historically used on polar bears. And they've had great luck with those, but they need to catch the bear, sedate it, and then get up close to be able
Mm.
to read them. So skin really attenuates radio signals, and it's going to make it tough to have anything anytime soon that can transmit.
That's interesting. I should mention too, to circle back to the adhesive tag project that BJ talked more about and the GPS ear tags we have. Those can also be tied into kind of a polar bear safety context, especially at this time of year when polar bear alert is more likely to handle some bears and be able to put some of these sorts of tags out. In many years, a problem polar bear that was taken in and handled and had a GPS transmitter attached and then was released into the wild before the sea ice came back could potentially re-enter a community, Churchill or a more northern community. So by having this GPS technology on especially a male bear or sub-adult, but also females, it could help managers kind of head off this bear before it re-entered a community. So that's a nice safety aspect there. Okay, we've got another question about the house. So Geoff, I'd love to throw this back to you. Can you tell us a little bit about how the house is heated, or kind of like talk a bit about the guts of the house? How are we heating it in Churchill, and maybe the lighting as well?
Sure. So we definitely took sustainability seriously on the build of this house. Any organization, especially a nonprofit, is going to have some budget limitations, but the house itself is very well designed and insulated for the north. It's very tightly sealed to the point where we have to have two heat recovery systems to bring in fresh air, but to use the heat of the inside air to make that more efficient. We're super lucky here in Manitoba in that our power is hydropower. So it is a relatively green power source, at least carbon free, and all of our heating at the house is done through electrical baseboard.
Thank you for that information. It really is a fantastic house. We're so lucky to have that and to be able to work in Churchill where people love to visit and where we have access to these polar bears and where we can bring you this incredible live polar bear action all polar bear season long. There's a good chance the bears might be on their way soon as we are seeing some of this ice build up near them. This guy doesn't seem in any rush at the moment. He's having a nice snow nap. But we can be sure as soon as there's any real solid sea ice on the bay here, those bears are heading out. They're going out to hunt and eat their main prey seals. They miss their blubber, I'm sure. They haven't had a good meal since late June or July. You've probably seen them snacking on kelp and other little bits of maybe a dead fox that was out on the tundra the other day that some of you might have seen. It's been wild on the tundra, holy. So we're going to keep bringing you polar bear action as long as we can. We'll be there as long as the polar bears are there. Please keep sending us your questions all the time. And again, we have incredible moderators who are also able to answer many of your questions on the explore.org page. And don't forget, it is Polar Bear Week, so we still have a couple fun days of polar bear tips and all sorts of neat images and cool things we're sharing with you, and the Polar Bear Bingo game. So we're going to be taking part as well. We can't wait to see your Polar Bear Bingo cards. I just think that's so much fun. There's so many great things to see, especially this week. I mean, you'll probably fill up your card in no time if things continue as they have been. So we'd like to wrap up now and say thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much to Geoff in Churchill. Thank you to BJ in Montana. Thank you to KT, also in Montana, but behind the scenes mixing. It's been a really nice discussion about all sorts of different technology in a few different countries, so pretty cool. There's a lot of people working together in a lot of different ways to help protect polar bears in their future. Their future is tied to ours, and there's a lot of ways that we can help polar bears. The number one thing is to talk about it. We need an energy shift from burning fossil fuels to renewable energies, and we can look to our communities. It's time for a systemic shift in how we use our energy and what we demand of our leaders. So check out our website. We'll be posting links. We can all work together to make sure our future, our shared future, is a clean one and a healthy one, and that it has Arctic sea ice and polar bears roaming throughout the entire Arctic. Thank you for your support. Our next live chat is next Wednesday. I believe it's at 1 p.m. Central. But again, we're around until then. We also have Tundra Connections webcasts for students, but they can be interesting for all ages, we think anyway. They're a lot of fun. And yeah, we'll be roaming around all weekend. You'll probably see Geoff out on the buggy again later this week. And so yeah, let us know if there's anything you want to know. And we will see you soon. Thanks again for joining. Have a great day on the Tundra. Bye. Thanks, guys.